The Bible with no church is like a treasure map with no guide to verify it. And in today's video, we are going to go over why the guide matters. As y'all know, I'm Catholic. I'm Catholic to the core. I love my Catholic belief. It's a beautiful tradition. This video will also be good for Orthodox as well, because Orthodox also believe in Apostolic Succession. And today, that's what we're going to go over. So get ready, buckle up. And if you're a Protestant, prepare to get maybe a little offended. But you know, sometimes the truth offends and you just got to suck it up and be offended. I had to suck it up when I was Protestant, so it's okay. But as always, you know, you guys know, hit that like and subscribe button if you like these videos so we can continue to push these videos out to other people. And let's shoot for 2,500 followers, because the last time I made one of these videos, because I make them in advance, the last time I made one like this, we were trying to get to 1,000 followers, and all of a sudden that happened out of nowhere. So thank you guys for that. But let's shoot for 2,500 now. This is a little modest upgrade. All right, so let's get into the video. For this video, what I'm going to try to do is look at some of the typical Protestant claims against the Catholic and Orthodox belief of Apostolic Succession, which basically means the apostles laid hands on people to make them bishops, and that succession has continued on throughout the history of the church all the way up until today. That means, in theory, every bishop that we have in the Catholic Church and even in the Orthodox Church, I think every priest too, can be traced all the way back to the apostles. That's the theory behind it. I do think that there were some records that got lost. I remember watching a history channel on YouTube that talked about the popes, talked about how you could trace the popes all the way back to, like, was it maybe 14 or 1500s? But then some of the records get lost after that. But in theory, if we had all the records, if they had not been lost, we could easily trace it back. And maybe we still can. Maybe I just don't know about the records. I haven't dealt that, I haven't went that deep into it. But anyhow, let's go with the biggest argument that Protestants make that I hear, and it's one that they love to say, and I hear it in Catholic debates all the time. It doesn't even have to be about Apostolic Succession, but they say we only need Scripture. We don't need Apostolic Succession. We don't need to have this unbroken chain of priests and bishops and popes if you're a Catholic. However, my friends, let's look at what Scripture says. You know, Paul passes the authority on, and he passes it on intentionally. He says, what you have heard from me, entrust to faithful people who will be able to teach others also. That is 2 Timothy 2:2. Obviously, Timothy is a bishop in the church. And Paul and the presbyters convey gifts by laying on hands. So we see this in 1 Timothy 4:14. We see it in 2 Timothy 1:6. And Titus is even told to appoint elders in every town in Titus 1:5. So already you see, Scripture obviously tells us that we need that priesthood. We need that succession. Scripture refutes the idea that we only need Scripture. That's just not true. But furthermore, if you want more evidence, look at tradition with St. Clement of Rome. In about the year 95, 96-ish, says the apostles appointed bishops and deacons and provided for successors. Then St. Irenaeus, in about the year 180, says you can refute heresy by tracing bishops back to the apostles. And even more, just based off the history, you know, the canon of Scripture was received, copied, and guarded by those same bishops and the councils of the church. So, you know, if the New Testament requires an authorized chain to teach it, Bible alone still points you back to the people authorized to hand it on. So kind of look at it like this. It's kind of like a relay race. The baton is inspired Scripture. The team is the church. And the handoff is succession. There's no handoff, there's no finish. So even scripture, history, tradition, logic, it all points to there being an apostolic succession of bishops. And even St. Irenaeus in the year 180 AD said a way to combat heresy is to trace the bishops back to the apostles. And what the bishops say is what you should listen to. Another wonderful argument that I see Protestants make is this idea that all believers are priests, that there is no need for apostolic succession. There's no need for there to be bishops and priests that flock over the church. I've heard that one quite a lot. That is a very common argument that is made, especially when Protestants want to refute the idea of calling no man father, and so on and so forth. It's a hard one for them to hold, though, because there's so many scripture passages that talk about bishops. And if I remember correctly, I was listening to a debate once between Father Pacwa, and it might have been Dr. Walter Martin, or it could have been Dr. White. It was one of those two. And he brought up that presbyters, I think he said that in the German, that's what they translated priest from, or something like that. It was something to do with he's so good with language. I can't remember exactly how he said it, but it was like presbyters translates the priest in German. And so, there's that. But Father Pacwa is like a genius. The man is so smart. I think he knows like 7 different languages, and German's one of them. I think he knows Polish, obviously English, Latin, of course, and who knows what other languages, probably Aramaic or something. He's a genius. But anyhow, let's look at scripture. In scripture, the royal priesthood of all believers, which is taught in 1 Peter 2:9, exists alongside a set-apart ministry. Paul gives Timothy and Titus oversight to ordain and correct in 1 Timothy 5:22 and in Titus 1:5. The apostles appoint elders by laying on hands in Acts 14:23. And then, of course, in tradition, you have St. Ignatius of Antioch, who urges Christians to stay united with the bishops, the presbyters, and the deacons. And that kind of shows the structure of the early offices in the church. From the 1st and 2nd centuries, churches list bishops and preserve rites of ordination. You kind of look at it from a logical perspective. A body needs both shared life and distinct organs. Universal priesthood describes dignity. Succession describes office and accountability. A good way to look at this is in a hospital. You have nurses, you have surgeons, you have different people. Everyone there cares about healthcare. They're in the healthcare profession, but not everyone is a surgeon. Not everyone can go in and operate on your heart or operate on your brain. They all have the same goal, which is to help people get better if they're sick, but their roles are vastly different. You would never want the receptionist doing surgery on your brain when they have no clue how to do surgery at all. So, that's kind of that creative way of looking at it. You got that logic way. I'm trying to tie the scripture in with tradition and history, as well as bringing in a little bit of logic and a little bit of creativity to help you see how it all makes sense. I want to do 5 of these. I was going to do 10, but time restraints. I'm already at 12 minutes on here. It's going to be different when I edit it because I stutter a lot, guys. So bear with me. So I'm going to do 5. I might make a part 2 to this at another time. But I'm trying to tie all that together so it makes sense. Now, another very common thing I hear, and I hear this mostly in the Baptist area. I think they hold this a lot, and I'm pretty sure Dr. White holds this. I may be wrong though, so don't hold me to that. But I think he does. And that is that the apostles were different. Their succession ended when they died. There was no more apostolic succession. There was no more of of that kind of leadership. And I've heard this said in debates a lot. I know there was a debate between, I think it was Carl Keating and Dave Hunt, or it was Carl Keating and Patrick Madrid debating two Protestants. I don't remember their names though. They made this argument. The first thing I want to point out though is that if you believe in Bible alone, nowhere in the Bible does it say that their succession ended when they die. It doesn't say that. That is a tradition, a man-made tradition, I might add, that Protestants believe. But let's dig a little deeper. In Scripture, Matthias replaced Judas by apostolic decision and prayer in Acts 1:20-26. Replacement kind of implies a continuing office. Jesus sends the apostles as the Father sent him with an ongoing mission and forgiveness of sins. And that's in John 20:21-23. But not just that, look at what tradition says. Hippolytus' book, Apostolic Tradition, records ordination prayers that pass on the apostolic ministry. And of course, then look at the history. You had successor lists, like the Pope. We can trace the Pope all the way back. We can trace most of the bishops all the way back. There's public records of this stuff. So, if the church's mission is to last to the end of the age, in Matthew 28:20, by the way, its governing offices must be renewable. It can't just end. It doesn't make sense. Kind of a way to look at this is a lighthouse with replaceable keepers. The light is Christ. The keepers change, so the light keeps shining. We'll always be there to make sure the lighthouse is upkept and whatnot. But there just needs to be a line of those people. It's never ending. It can't just be one person and then that's it. What many Protestants are basically asking us to do is deviate from what the original Christians taught. They're saying that we don't do that now. I haven't really heard a good explanation as to why it would end, because it doesn't say that in the Bible, and it just doesn't make sense. If you believe in sola scriptura, the Bible alone, your doctrines should be found in the Bible. And if that is a doctrine that you hold to, you need to show me in the Bible where that teaching authority, where that succession ended, and you just can't. And that is a very common argument that I hear from Protestants. And when they're pressed on that in debates, I don't really hear a good answer, not one that satisfies me. It's kind of how I believe. Number 4, I want to kind of go over, it's more about the office of the Pope. And it's that you will hear Protestants say things like, Peter was not supreme because Paul rebuked him. And therefore, that means that the office of the papacy did not exist, because if it did, Paul would not be able to rebuke Peter. Now, I've heard this one in arguments before, in debates before. I don't remember if I heard any with Dr. White. Dr. White, he's good surface level at keeping true to what Catholics believe, at least at the surface. But there are some Protestants who hone in on this really hard, that Paul rebuking Peter means that there was no office of papacy. However, that's just not true. In Scripture, Peter receives the keys and the roll to bind and loose in Matthew 16:18-19. He is told to strengthen your brothers in Luke 22:32 and to feed my sheep in John 21:15-17. Paul's public correction in Galatians 2 is about behavior, not Peter's office. In tradition, we see Irenaeus highlighting the importance of Rome's succession from Peter and Paul as a touchstone for unity. And in history, when there's major disputes that come up, the churches appeal to Rome very early on. Obviously, a leader can be corrected without losing their authority. The authority includes accountability. It's like a team captain in a sports team can get a penalty and still remain the captain. Behavior is not doctrine. It's not something that takes away from the power that the popes have. So don't let this argument get to you much, because it just doesn't make sense. Just because Paul was able to rebuke St. Peter's behavior doesn't mean that St. Peter was never pope. It just means that St. Peter should not have been behaving the way he was behaving. And there's nothing wrong with St. Paul doing that. I'm sure there have been many popes in history that have done some really stupid stuff, and they have been corrected. And they learn from that correction. And there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't take away from their teaching authority and the fact that they are shepherd over the church. And then this leads on to my final point I want to make that Protestants bring up. And this is common too. And this argument I could understand. I understand where they're coming from, because this has happened. And that is that there have been corrupt bishops. And so a broken chain cannot have actual succession. These bishops have been so corrupted that this chain, this apostolic succession, just would not make sense. And I kind of understand that. I can understand for the Protestants who hold that true in their heart, they're listening more to, I would say they're listening more to emotional reasoning. And I think most Protestants who make that argument actually make that in really good faith, because they don't like what they have seen that some bishops have done in the past. And I can completely understand that. However, Jesus also said there would be wolves in sheep's clothing that would come into the church and do this. This is going to happen. We have to accept that. We can't stop Satan from being Satan. Satan is going to do everything he can to get into the church and corrupt it from the inside. That is what he wants to do. So, how do you deal with this? Look at Scripture. Jesus predicts these. Like I said, the bad shepherds, he does not abolish or get rid of the office in Matthew 23, 2-3, and Acts 20, 29. The office is for the flock's good, even when individuals fail. And in history, the church has removed, replaced, or corrected immoral leaders while still keeping the office. And in history, with the issues with doctrine, they were settled through councils of bishops, not by restarting Christianity. Just think of it like this. A judge's personal sins do not nullify the court system. The cure for bad leadership is reform, not anarchy. A cracked violinist does not mean we throw out the whole daggone orchestra. We just reseat the player and keep the score. Keep it going. One bad bishop, well, there's obviously been more than one, but this was predicted by Christ. Christ still made that office. He still told the apostles to lay hands and pass on their teaching authority to other people. Even though he said there would be wolves in sheep's clothing, he still said that this office is needed. There are going to be bad ones. This is going to happen, but you still need them. Don't throw out the whole office just because of some bad people. And a lot of people might think that there have been more bad bishops than good. I would say probably not. Based off what I know in history, especially with the popes, I would say there have been overwhelmingly more good bishops than bad. I think history can vindicate that pretty easily. Like you got St. Ambrose of Milan, my favorite, St. Augustine, St. Leo the Great, Gregory the Great, St. Gregory the Great. Even recently, Pope Pius XII, Pope Pius X. I would honestly say there were more good than bad. So, what's my lesson of the day? My lesson of the day today, guys, is don't let slick arguments keep you from the truth of the Catholic faith. The Catholic faith is a beautiful faith. It's a faith that I would never trade for the world. I'm happy with my Catholic faith. You can learn a lot through the history of the church. I recommend reading historical books or watching videos of the church history. You'll see that this idea of apostolic succession has always been there from the very beginning. It is hard to deny that from history. It's so much so like that. I remember when I was younger, I had a big set of encyclopedias, the books. I remember reading the Catholic Church in that encyclopedia. And it literally says the church started by Jesus Christ in the year 33 AD or something like that. I don't remember what year it was, but it says the church that was started by Jesus Christ. The encyclopedias said it. I just thought that was interesting. But that's your lesson. Don't be fooled by slick arguments. Do your own research. I'm telling you, like me, when I was a Protestant, you'll see history backs the Catholic claim to apostolic succession. All right, guys, as always, let me know what y'all think in the comment section below. Maybe you think I'm wrong. Maybe you think I'm right. Oh, maybe you think I'm just full of crap. I don't know. Just let me know. I'm curious. We'll have a discussion. We'll talk about it. Of course, you guys, y'all know y'all are valuable and that you matter. God bless. Peace.